The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, also known as the Chosin Reservoir Campaign of the Changjin Lake Campaign, Chinese, pinyin, Cháng Jīn Hú Zhànyì, was a decisive battle in the Korean War. Chosin is the Japanese pronunciation of the Korean name, Changjin. The UN forces relied on Japanese language maps dating from their occupation of Korea, which had only ended 5 years earlier at the conclusion of World War II. Shortly after the People's Republic of China entered the conflict, the People's Volunteer Army 9th Army infiltrated the northeastern part of North Korea. On the 27th of November, the Chinese 9th Army surprised the U.S. 10th Corps commanded by Major General Edward Armand at the Chosin Reservoir area. A brutal 17-day battle in freezing weather soon followed. In the period between the 27th of November and the 13th of December 1950, 30,000 United Nations troops under the field command of Major General Oliver P. Smith were encircled and attacked by approximately 120,000 Chinese troops under the command of Song Shi-lun, who had been ordered by Mao Zedong to destroy the UN forces. The UN forces were nonetheless able to make a fighting withdrawal and broke out of the encirclement while inflicting crippling losses on the Chinese. While the battle resulted in the Chinese pushing the UN out of North Korea, it was a Pyrrhic victory. The evacuation of the 10th Corps from the port of Hungnam marked the complete withdrawal of UN troops from North Korea. Background: by mid-1950, after the successful landing at Incheon by the U.S. 10th Corps and the subsequent destruction of the Korean People's Army, the Korean War appeared to be all but over. United Nations forces advanced rapidly into North Korea with the intention of reuniting North and South Korea before the end of 1950. North Korea is divided through the center by the impassable Taebaek Mountains, which separated the UN forces into two groups. The U.S. 8th Army advanced north through the western coast of the Korean peninsula, while the Republic of Korea 1st Corps and the U.S. 10th Corps advanced north on the eastern coast. At the same time, the People's Republic of China entered the conflict after issuing several warnings to the United Nations. On the 19th of October 1950, large formations of Chinese troops, dubbed the People's Volunteer Army, secretly crossed the border and into North Korea. One of the first Chinese units to reach the Chosin Reservoir area was the PVA 42nd Corps, and it was tasked with stopping the eastern UN advances. On the 25th of October, the advancing ROC 1st Corps made contact with the Chinese and halted at Funchilin Pass, south of the Chosin Reservoir. After the landing at Wonsan, the U.S. 1st Marine Division of the 10th Corps engaged the defending PVA 124th Division on the 2nd of November, and the ensuing battle caused heavy casualties among the Chinese. On the 6th of November, the PVA 42nd Corps ordered a retreat to the north with the intention of luring the UN forces into the Chosin Reservoir. By the 24th of November, the 1st Marine Division occupied both Sinhungni on the eastern side of the reservoir, and Udamini on the west side of the reservoir. Faced with the sudden attacks by Chinese forces in the 8th Army sector, General Douglas MacArthur ordered the 8th Army to launch the Home by Christmas offensive. To support the offensive, MacArthur ordered the 10th Corps to attack west from the Chosin Reservoir and to cut the vital Manpoyin Kang Hui Shan supply line. As a response, Major General Edward M. Armand, commander of the U.S. 10th Corps, formulated a plan on the 21st of November. It called for the U.S. 1st Marine Division to advance west through Udamini, while the U.S. 7th Infantry Division would provide a regimental combat team to protect the right flank at Sinhungni. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division would also protect protect the left flank while providing security in the rear area. By then the 10th Corps was stretched thin along a 400 miles front. Surprised by the Marine landing at Wonsan, China's Chairman Mao Zedong called for the immediate destruction of the ROC Capital Division, ROC 3rd Infantry Division, U.S. 1st Marine Division, and U.S. 7th Infantry Division in a telegraph to Commander Song Shi-Lun of the PVN 9th Army on the 31st of October. Under Mao's urgent orders, the 9th Army was rushed into North Korea on the 10th of November. Undetected by UN intelligence, the 9th Army quietly entered the Chosin Reservoir area on the 17th of November, with the 20th Corps of the 9th Army relieving the 42nd Corps near Udamini. Prelude. Location, terrain and weather. Chosin Reservoir is a man-made lake located in the northeast of the Korean peninsula. The name Chosin is the Japanese pronunciation of the Korean place name Changjin, and the name stuck due to the outdated Japanese maps used by UN forces. The battle's main focus was around the 78 miles long road that connects Hungnam and Chosin Reservoir, which served as the only retreat route for the UN forces. Through these roads, Udamini and Sinhungni, located at the west and east side of the reservoir respectively, are connected at Hagaru-ri. For that, the road passes through Koto-ri and eventually leads to the port of Hungnam. The area around the Chosin Reservoir was sparsely populated. The battle was fought over some of the roughest terrain during some of the harshest winter weather conditions of the Korean War. The road was created by cutting through the hilly terrain of Korea, with steep climbs and drops. Dominant peaks, such as the Funcheon Pass and the Toktong Pass, overlook the entire length of the road. The road's quality was poor, and in some places it was reduced to a one-lane gravel trail. On the 14th of November, a cold front from Siberia descended over the Chosin Reservoir, and the temperature plunged to as low as -35 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold weather was accompanied by frozen ground, creating considerable danger of frostbite casualties, icy roads, and weapon malfunctions. Medical supplies froze. Morphine syrups had to be defrosted in a medic's mouth before they could be injected. Frozen blood plasma was useless on the battlefield. Even cutting off clothing to deal with a wound risked gangrene and frostbite. Batteries used for the jeeps and radios did not function properly in the temperature and quickly ran down. The lubrication in the guns chilled and rendered them useless in battle. Likewise, the springs on the firing pins would not strike hard enough to fire the round, or would jam. Forces and strategies. Although the 1st Marine Division landed at Wonsan as part of Armand's U.S. 10th Corps, Armand and Major General Oliver P. Smith of the 1st Marine Division shared a mutual loathing of each other that dated back to a meeting before the landing at Incheon, during which Armand had spoken of how easy amphibious landings are even though he had never been involved in one. Smith believed that there were large numbers of Chinese forces in North Korea despite the fact that higher headquarters in Tokyo had said otherwise, while Armand felt Smith was overly cautious. The mutual distrust between the two commanders made Smith slow the 1st Marine Division's advance towards the Chosin Reservoir against Armand's instructions. Along the way, Smith established supply points and airfields at Hagaru-ri and Koto-ri. While the U.S. 10th Corps was pushing towards the reservoir, the Chinese formulated their strategy based on their experiences in the Chinese Civil War, working from the assumption that only a light UN presence would be at the reservoir. The 9th Army was to first destroy the UN garrisons at Udamini and Sinhungni, then push towards Hagaru-ri, believing that the bulk of the U.S. 10th Corps would scramble to rescue the destroyed units. units. The 9th Army would then block and trap the main UN forces on the road between Hagaruri and Hungnam. The 9th Army initially committed 8 divisions for the battle, with most of the forces concentrated at Udamini and Sinhungni. The flaw in the Chinese plan was a lack of accurate intelligence on the UN forces. Although the US 10th Corps was stretched thin over northeast Korea, the slow marine advance allowed the bulk of the US 1st Marine Division, including the 5th, 7th and 11th Marines, to be concentrated at Udamini. Conversely, the strategically important Hagaruri, which contained an airfield and a supply dump, was not a priority for the Chinese despite being lightly defended by the 1st and the 7th Marines. Only the Regimental Combat Team 31, an understrengthened, hastily formed Regimental Combat Team of the U.S. 7th Infantry Division, was thinly spread along the eastern bank of the reservoir. Those units would later take the brunt of the Chinese assaults. As for the UN strength, the 1st Marine Division had an effective strength of 25,473 men at the start of the battle, and it was further reinforced by the British 41 Royal Marine Commando and the equivalent strength of 2 regiments from the 3rd and the 7th Infantry Divisions. Thus the UN forces had an approximate strength of 30,000 during the course of the battle. The UN forces at Chosin were also supported by one of the greatest concentrations of air power during the Korean War, in which the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing stationed at Yompo Airfield and 5 aircraft carriers from the U.S. Navy Task Force 77 were able to launch 230 sorties daily to provide close air support during the battle, while the U.S. Air Force Far East Combat Cargo Command in Japan reached the capacity of airdropping 250 tons of supplies per day to resupply the trapped UN forces. Although the 9th Army was one of China's elite formations composed of veterans and former POWs from the Weihai campaign, several deficiencies hampered its ability during the battle. Initially, the 9th Army was intended to be outfitted in Manchuria during November, but Mao suddenly ordered it into Korea before that could happen. As the result, the 9th Army received almost no winter gear for the harsh Korean winter. Similarly, poor logistics forced the 9th Army to abandon heavy artillery while working with little food and ammunition. The food shortage forced the 9th Army to initially station a third of its strength away from the Chosin Reservoir as reserve, and starvation and exposure soon broke out among the Chinese units as foraging was not an option at the sparsely populated reservoir. By the end of the battle, more Chinese troops died from the cold than from combat and air raids. As for the Chinese strength, it is normally assumed that the Chinese had 120,000 troops for the battle, due to the fact that the 9th Army were composed of 12 divisions with a strength of 10,000 plus men per division. Before arriving in Korea, the 9th Army was reinforced. Each of its 3 corps now had 4 divisions instead of the regular 3. Infantry from 2 formerly liberated nationalist divisions were absorbed to bring each infantry company up to strength. Some companies had 150 men, but some companies were reinforced with more than 200 men. On average, each division of the 9th Army had more infantry troops than other Chinese divisions. Eventually all 12 Chinese divisions of the 9th Army were deployed. 8 divisions of the PVA 20th and 27th Corps served as the main attacking force. 4 divisions of the PVA 26th Corps initially were held back in reserve, and deployed after 20th and 27th Corps exhausted all available strength.